The familiar scent of pine and aged wood hit me like a sledgehammer as I stepped out of my rental car in front of the Whitmore and Associates law firm. 3 years. It had been 3 years since I'd set foot in Millbrook, Connecticut, and the small New England town looked exactly as I remembered, quaint colonial buildings lining Main Street, maple trees beginning their autumn transformation. I straightened my black tie and checked my watch. 2:47 p.m. The reading of Dad's will was scheduled for 3 o'clock. I could already see the familiar silhouettes of my cousins through the frosted glass windows of the law office. My stomach churned with grief and anxiety that had been my constant companion since receiving the call about Dad's heart attack 2 weeks ago. As I pushed open the heavy oak door, conversations inside immediately died. 4 pairs of eyes turned toward me with expressions ranging from mild surprise to barely concealed hostility. My cousins Brad, Jennifer, Marcus, and Sarah sat in leather chairs, all dressed in funeral attire. "Well, well," Brad said, his voice carrying that same condescending tone I remembered from childhood. At 42, he'd maintained his quarterback build, though his hairline had retreated significantly. "Look what the cat dragged in. Didn't think you'd bother showing up." "Michael," I forced a smile and nodded to the group. Brad, Jennifer, Marcus, Sarah. Each name felt foreign after years of silence. "I'm sorry for your loss. I know Uncle Robert meant a lot to all of you." Jennifer, impeccably dressed in a black Chanel suit, let out a soft snort. "Our loss? That's rich, considering you couldn't even be bothered to visit him in the hospital or answer his calls for the past 2 years. The accusation hit its mark. Wasn't wrong. After the explosive argument I'd had with Dad about my decision to leave Millbrook and pursue my dreams, in California, our relationship had become increasingly strained. Phone calls became less frequent, then stopped altogether. I'd thrown myself into my work as a documentary filmmaker, using my career as an excuse to avoid the complicated emotions that came with family obligations. I was working on a project. "In remote Alaska," I said quietly. "I didn't get the message until it was too late," Marcus interrupted, his usually jovial demeanor replaced by barely contained anger. "Uncle Robert talked about you constantly, you know. He's always hoping you'd call, always making excuses for why you never came home for holidays." Before I could respond, the inner office door opened and Mr. Whitmore stepped out. Charles Whitmore had been the family lawyer for as long as I could remember. A thin man in his 70s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a perpetually serious expression. "Michael," he said, extending his hand. "I'm glad you made it. Please, everyone, come in. We have quite a bit to discuss." We filed into the oak-paneled conference room, where a large mahogany table dominated the space. Legal documents were neatly arranged at Mr. Whitmore's seat, and I noticed a laptop computer, unusual for a man who still used a fountain pen for most correspondence. "Before we begin," Mr. Whitmore said, adjusting his glasses, "I want to express my condolences to all of you. Robert was not just a client, but a dear friend. His passing was sudden, but I can assure you that his affairs were in perfect order." He opened the leather portfolio and withdrew a thick document. Robert's last will and testament was updated just 6 months ago. He was very specific about his wishes. I shifted uncomfortably. Dad had always been meticulous about finances, but I'd never given much thought to his will. The house in Millbrook was valuable, certainly, and his construction company had been profitable for decades. But I'd never expected anything from his estate. "Let's begin with the smaller bequests," Mr. Whitmore continued. To his longtime housekeeper, Mrs. Catherine Morris, Robert leaves $50,000. To the Millbrook Community Foundation, he leaves $100,000 to establish a scholarship fund. There were murmurs of approval. Dad had always been passionate about supporting young people. "Now to his family," Mr. Whitmore said, and the room fell silent. To his nephews and nieces Bradford, Jennifer, Marcus, and Sarah Patterson, Robert leaves his collection of antique tools. It's valued at approximately $30,000, to be divided equally among them. The cousins exchanged glances. It was a nice gesture, but hardly the windfall they'd been expecting. To his nephew Jennifer's daughter, Emma, he leaves his 1967 Mustang convertible, fully restored. Jennifer smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. Emma was her 16-year-old daughter. And finally, Mr. Whitmore said, his voice taking, on a more formal tone, to his son Michael Robert Patterson. Robert leaves the entirety of his remaining estate, including his home at 247 Maple Street, Patterson Construction Company. All associated assets, real estate holdings, and financial accounts. With a current estimated value of approximately $2.8 million, the silence that followed was deafening. I felt like I'd been struck by lightning. $2.8 million? The construction company? The house where I'd grown up? My mind reeled, but my cousin's reactions were immediate and explosive. What? Brad's voice cracked like a whip. That's impossible. Can't leave everything to him. He jabbed a finger in my direction. Michael abandoned this family years ago. Jennifer's face had gone pale, then flushed red with rage. This is ridiculous. Uncle Robert wouldn't do this. Michael, you haven't even spoken to him in years. There has to be a mistake, Marcus said, his voice rising. Uncle Robert told me just last year that he was disappointed in Michael's choices. I sat frozen, unable to speak. This couldn't be real. Dad had been angry with me for leaving, for choosing my career over family obligations. We'd barely spoken. In 2 years, why would he leave me everything? I understand your surprise, Mr. Whitmore said calmly, but I assure you, this will is valid and reflects Robert's explicit wishes. He was very clear about his intentions. This is bullshit, Brad said, standing up abruptly. I'm contesting this will. There's no way Uncle Robert was in his right mind when he made this decision. He was perfectly lucid, Mr. Whitmore replied firmly. In fact, he anticipated that there might be some disagreement about his decisions, which is why he asked me to prepare something special for this occasion. The lawyer turned to his laptop and pressed a few keys. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly my father's face appeared on the monitor. My breath caught in my throat. His recent dad looked exactly as I remembered him. His hair was grayer, his face more lined, but his eyes held the same intensity. I remembered from childhood. If you're watching this, Dad's voice said from the speakers, then I'm gone, and Charlie has just read my will. I imagine some of you are pretty upset right now, especially Brad and Jennifer. Brad's face turned purple. I don't need to listen to this, he muttered. But he didn't move to leave. Dad's image looked directly at the camera, and it felt like he was speaking directly to me. Michael, I know you're probably as shocked as everyone else. I know you think I was angry with you for leaving Millbrook, for choosing your own path instead of the one I wanted for you. But son, I need you to understand something. I was never angry that you left. I was angry that you felt you had to cut us out of your life to do it. Tears began to blur my vision. The room around me seemed to fade away as I focused on my father's words. I watched your documentaries, you know. Every single one. I have them all on DVD, and I've shown them to anyone who will sit still long enough to watch. I'm proud of you, Michael. Proud of the man you've become. Proud of the stories you tell. Proud of the difference you're making in the world. Jennifer made a noise of disgust. This is manipulation. It's pure and simple. But Dad wasn't finished. I know why you stayed away. You thought I disapproved of your choices. Thought I wanted you to be someone you weren't. But the truth is, I knew. From the time you were 10 years old, that you were different from the rest of us. You saw the world differently, had bigger dreams than our little town could contain. He paused, and I could see the emotion in his eyes. I made mistakes, Michael. I should have told you how proud I was instead of focusing on what I thought you should be doing. I should have supported your dreams instead of trying to make you fit into mine. The weight of years of misunderstanding crashed over me. All this time I'd thought Dad was disappointed in me. But he'd been proud. He'd been watching my work, following my career from afar. Now, I'm sure Brad and Jennifer, and probably Marcus too, are wondering why I didn't leave them more, Dad continued. The truth is, you've all done well for yourselves. Brad, your real estate business is thriving. Jennifer, your husband's law practice has made you comfortable.
All right.
Your accounting firm is successful. You don't need my money. He looked directly at the camera again. But Michael, I know you've been struggling. I know documentary filmmaking isn't exactly a lucrative career. I know you've been turning down commercial projects to focus on the stories you believe in. I admire that integrity, son, but I also want to give you the freedom to continue doing what you love without worrying about money. The room was completely silent now. Even Brad had stopped his angry muttering. The construction company is yours. If you want it, Dad said. But I know that's not your path. Sell it. Keep it. Do whatever feels right to you. The house is yours too. It's been in our family for 4 generations, and I hope someday you'll want to come home to it. He smiled. I love you, Michael. I've always loved you. And I'm sorry I didn't do a better job of showing it while I was alive. The video ended, and the room fell into stunned silence. I wiped tears from my eyes, not caring who saw them. Finally, Sarah spoke. I had no idea Uncle Robert felt that way, she said quietly. The silence stretched uncomfortably as Mr. Whitmore closed his laptop. The weight of Dad's words hung in the air, making it difficult to breathe. Well, Brad said finally, that was quite the performance. But it doesn't change anything. Uncle Robert wasn't thinking clearly in his final months. Brad, please, Sarah interjected, but he wasn't finished. No, Sarah, this is insane. Michael disappears for years, doesn't even bother to come to the funeral. And suddenly he's the golden boy who gets everything. He began pacing. People don't just give away multi-million-dollar estates to relatives they haven't spoken to in years. Mr. Whitmore cleared his throat. I can assure you that your uncle was in perfect mental health when he updated his will. I've been practicing law for 47 years. I've never had a client more certain of their decisions than Robert was. I don't care how certain he was, Jennifer said, her voice rising. This is about family loyalty, about being there. When someone needs you, Michael wasn't there. We were. I found my voice for the first time since the video ended. I never asked for this, I said quietly. Never expected anything from Dad's estate. I didn't even know he had this much money. Oh, please, Marcus said. You expect us to believe you had no idea? That you didn't know about the real estate investments? The stock portfolio? I didn't, I said, meeting his gaze. Dad never talked to me about money. Because you never gave him the chance, Brad snapped. You were too busy living your artistic life in California to care about what was happening here. The accusation stung because it held truth. I'd been focused on my career, on building something meaningful through my documentary work. I'd also been running from the pain of losing my parents, from the expectations of a small town, from the complicated feelings that came with being the only one in my family who'd chosen a different path. You're right, I said, surprising everyone, including myself. I wasn't here. I made choices that hurt Dad and probably hurt all of you too. I was so focused on proving I could make it on my own that I forgot about the people who mattered. Admissions seemed to take some of the wind out of Brad's sails. He stopped pacing and looked at me with curiosity. But that doesn't mean I manipulated Dad into leaving me his estate, I continued. I had no idea he was even thinking about updating his will. Mr. Whitmore spoke up. If I may, I think I can shed some light on that. Robert used to come to my office regularly, not just for legal matters, but sometimes just to chat. He'd often bring DVDs of Michael's work and insist on showing them to me. He was incredibly proud, but also incredibly sad that Michael didn't know how he felt. Why didn't he just tell him? Sarah asked. Why didn't he call Michael and tell him he was proud? I encouraged him to do exactly that, Mr. Whitmore replied. But Robert was from a generation that didn't find it easy to express emotions directly. He kept saying he would call, but he was afraid that too much time had passed, that Michael wouldn't want to hear from him. The irony was crushing. Dad had been proud of me, but too afraid to reach out, while I'd been convinced he was disappointed, and too proud to reach out myself. Years of silence and misunderstanding, all because 2 stubborn men couldn't find a way to bridge the gap between them. This is all very touching, Jennifer said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, but it doesn't change the facts. Uncle Robert made a decision that hurts the family members who were actually present in his life. Jenny, Sarah said quietly, maybe we should think about what Uncle Robert actually said. He explained his reasoning, said we're all doing well. Financially, that we don't need the money. That's not the point, Jennifer snapped. It's not about need. It's about recognition. I understood her anger. From her perspective, I'd been absent for years while she and the others had maintained relationships with Dad. They'd probably visited him regularly, included him in family gatherings, been there for him in ways I hadn't. Jennifer, I said carefully, I know how this looks. I know it seems unfair. But I want you to know that I never intended to hurt Dad or any of you by leaving. You did choose, Brad said. You chose your dreams. You're right, I did. I looked around the table at my cousins, people I'd grown up with, shared holidays with, who had been like siblings to me before everything got complicated. And I've regretted it every day for the past 3 years. Not the career choice, but the way I handled it. The way I cut everyone out instead of finding a way to stay connected. Marcus leaned forward. So what happens now? You going to take the money and disappear again? Sell everything and go back to California? I didn't have a good answer. The inheritance was overwhelming, both financially and emotionally. This money would give me the freedom to pursue my passion without worrying about paying rent. But it also came with enormous responsibility. Dad's construction company employed 12 people. The house on Maple Street had been in our family for 4 generations. I don't know, I said honestly. I came here expecting to attend a simple will reading and then drive back to the airport. I never imagined anything like this. I stood up, suddenly feeling claustrophobic. I need some air, I said. I need to think about all of this, Michael Sarah said as I headed for the door. Would you like to come to dinner tonight? I know this is a lot to process, but maybe we could talk more calmly. I paused at the door. Part of me wanted to run, to get back in my rental car and drive straight to the airport. But another part knew that running away again would be the wrong choice. I'd like that, I said. Thank you, Sarah. Mrs. Morris opened the door before I could knock, as if she'd been watching for me through the lace curtains. At 73, she looked exactly as I remembered. Silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. Kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. And that warm smile that had comforted me through some of the darkest moments of my teenage years. Michael, my dear boy, she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled of lavender and fresh-baked cookies. I've been praying you'd come home. The house at 247 Maple Street enveloped me like a familiar blanket. Nothing had changed. The same hardwood floor as Dad had installed himself. The same family photos lining the hallway. The same grandfather clock keeping time. I kept everything exactly as your father wanted, Mrs. Morris said, leading me into the kitchen. Yahweh said, this house was waiting for you to come home. I sat at the same oak table where Dad had helped me with homework, where we'd shared countless meals, where we'd had our last real conversation before I left for California. I saw the lawyer today, I said as Mrs. Morris made tea. Dad left me everything. Her hands paused. I know. He told me what he was planning to do. I tried to talk him into reaching out to you first, but he was too proud, too afraid. Afraid of what? That you'd reject him the way he thought he'd rejected you. She set a steaming mug in front of me. Your father wasn't a man who found it. Easy to admit his mistakes, Michael. But he knew he'd handled things poorly when you wanted to leave for college. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. I remember our last fight. He said I was being selfish, that I was abandoning my responsibilities to the family. He was terrified, Mrs. Morris said quietly. You were the only family he had left after your parents died. The thought of losing you two scared him more than he could admit, but I wasn't abandoning him. I was just trying to find my own way. I know that, dear. And deep down, your father knew it too. But fear makes people say things they don't mean. You spent the last 3 years regretting every word of that conversation. Was Dad really proud of my work, or was that just something he said for the video? She stood up and walked to a cabinet I hadn't noticed before. When she opened it, I saw shelves lined with DVDs, every documentary I'd ever made, arranged in chronological order. There were also newspaper clippings, magazine articles, and printed out reviews from film festivals. He watched your latest documentary about the Arctic 3 times in 1 week, she said. He kept saying he wished he could tell people that the filmmaker was his son, but he was afraid they'd ask why you never came home. The weight of all those lost years pressed down on me. How many opportunities had we missed to reconcile? I thought he was disappointed in me, I said. I thought he saw my career as a waste of time. Oh, Michael. Mrs. Morris returned to her seat and reached across the table to pat my hand. Your father was many things, but he was never disappointed in you. Hurt? Yes. Lonely? Absolutely. Never disappointed? Cousins are pretty upset, I said finally. They think Dad was being unfair. I'm sure they are. But your father thought long and hard about his decision. He knew it would cause hurt feelings, but he also knew that his nephews and nieces were all financially secure. You're the one who's been struggling. How did he know I was struggling? Mrs. Morris smiled sadly. Hired a private investigator. 3 years ago, not to spy on you, but to make sure you were safe and healthy. He knew about the tiny apartment in Los Angeles, the months when you lived on ramen noodles to save money for equipment. The realization hit me like a physical blow. All this time, I'd thought I was completely alone in my struggles. But Dad had been watching over me, worrying about me, making sure I was okay even when we weren't speaking. There's something else. You should know, Mrs. Morris continued. Your father's business wasn't just about construction. In the past 10 years, he'd started buying old houses and restoring them. He'd find abandoned properties, historic homes that were falling apart, and bring them back to life. I didn't know that. He said it was inspired by you. By watching your documentaries about preserving history, about finding beauty in forgotten places, he started seeing old houses the way you saw the subjects of your films as stories worth. Saving. As Mrs. Morris made arrangements for me to meet with Tom Bradley, Dad's foreman, I walked through the house, really seeing it for the first time in years. Every room held memories, but now I was also noticing the care that had gone into maintaining it. In Dad's study, I found more evidence of his secret connection to my life. A folder on his desk contained printed emails from film festival organizers, reviews of my work, and even a letter from an environmental organization thanking me for a documentary that had helped them raise awareness about climate change before I left for Sarah's house. Mrs. Morris handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's careful script. Your father left you a letter? He asked me to give it to you when you came home, not if you came home. He was certain you'd return eventually. My hands trembled as I took it from her. Should I read it now? That's up to you. But I think your father would want you to read it when you're ready to hear what he had to say. Sarah's house felt warm and inviting against the October evening. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but civil. Over dinner, we began to share more honestly about our lives and feelings. I'm still angry, Jennifer admitted during dessert, but I'm starting to understand Uncle Robert's reasoning. We were all doing well financially. Maybe he saw something we didn't. Brad nodded slowly. My business had its best year ever. I wanted his money, but I don't need it to survive. Neither do I, Marcus added. But Michael, you've been struggling with your documentaries. Maybe Uncle Robert knew that. The conversation revealed my financial struggles, how funding for my Arctic documentary had fallen through, how I'd been living on ramen noodles and freelance corporate videos to survive. My cousins began to understand why Dad had made his decision. As we talked, the walls between us began to crumble. We shared memories of growing up together, acknowledged the hurt on both sides, and slowly started to forgive. What if you stayed? Sarah asked as the evening wound down. What if you tried running Dad's business, maybe combining it with your filmmaking somehow? The idea intrigued me. I don't know anything about construction, but you understand stories, Brad said. People. Those are valuable skills in any business. That night, I finally read Dad's letter in his study. Its words revealed years of regret, love, and hope. I was never disappointed in you, son. I was proud but afraid to show it. This inheritance isn't a burden. It's my way of giving you the freedom to pursue your dreams without financial worry. Use it however feels right. The construction business wasn't just building. I started restoring historic homes, inspired by your documentaries about preserving forgotten stories. Maybe there's a way to combine our worlds. He'd also left detailed plans for combining historic restoration with documentary filmmaking, preserving not just buildings but the stories they contained. The next morning, I met with Tom Bradley at the construction office. We discussed a partnership where he'd handle operations while I explored new directions combining construction with storytelling. Over the following weeks, I worked with my cousins to plan a new venture. Brad offered his real estate connections to find historic properties. Marcus helped structure the business. Jennifer contributed her historical society knowledge. Sarah coordinated community outreach. We were becoming a family again, not just through shared inheritance, but through shared purpose. 6 months later, I stood in a restored Victorian mansion, filming a documentary about its Underground Railroad history. Our Hidden Stories project was preserving both buildings and the human stories they contained. "This is exactly what Uncle Robert envisioned," Sarah said, watching our crew work on the restoration while I documented the process. My cousins had become true partners in the venture. We'd transformed our inheritance conflict into a collaborative, family business that honored Dad's legacy while pursuing meaningful work. The documentary series was gaining national attention. The construction company was thriving under Tom's leadership, with our new historic preservation focus. Most importantly, our family was whole again that evening. I sat in Dad's study. My study now, I realized he'd given me much more than money. He'd given me the chance to come home, to rebuild relationships I'd thought were broken, to find work that combined my passion with his legacy. Mrs. Morris knocked softly. "How are you feeling, dear?" "Like I'm finally where I belong," I said. Through the window, I could see the lights of Millbrook twinkling in the distance. This small Connecticut town wasn't a limitation, it was a foundation. Dad had known that. Eventually, I'd understand the difference. His greatest gift wasn't the inheritance itself, but the wisdom to wait patiently for me to find my way home.